Hi guys, Alec Peirce at a dive store called Scuba Diving. I finally got it right. Great little dive store. We've done a good number of our tech tips here from Scuba Diving up in Barrie, Ontario, right on the highway. If you're going to the Kawarthas or the Muskokas or farther north, Algonquin, wherever, Lake Simcoe, be sure to drop in. Chris and Lorraine are fantastic folks, and a little tip, by the way, if some of you guys are instructors or leaders or business-minded and you've always dreamt about owning a dive store, this may be your opportunity. Lorraine was just telling me that they're making a major change in their life, which involves a move, maybe right out of Canada. So Simcoe Diving, this great little dive store, just might be an opportunity for somebody. We can talk about that. So, O-rings. Yeah, we need to talk about O-rings. Now, it's kind of interesting for me because I started diving. When I started diving, the regulators were two-hose regulators. Yeah, in fact, the regulator I was trained on was a U.S. diver's aqua-lung Mistral. Mistral is a word that describes a warm air that comes down out of the mountains. Yeah, not exactly the way the regulator worked, but it was a good name. The reason I mention that is that the parts for a Mistral, we couldn't buy service kits back then, but you can now. But the parts for a Mistral, when you got all the parts for a Mistral and put them all on the table, 20, 25 parts, and set them all like, no O-rings. There were no O-rings. They didn't have, well, they had O-rings. O-rings, trivia, were invented in the 1800s, yeah. But they certainly weren't into the sport of scuba diving at that time, not for a long time, not until the 60s, quite a bit later. Anyway, now, every regulator, tanks and hoses, everything uses O-rings. Yeah, because they're cheap, first of all, extremely effective, and there's a lot of them. So I thought I'd take 2 or 3 minutes here and just talk about O-rings. First thing is, why are they called O-rings? Everybody says, well, they're called O-rings because it looks like a big O. Not always. Cut it, and look at the end of it. It's a perfect O, always is. No matter what size it is, you can stretch it all you want, change the shape. But a cut O-ring, look at the end, it's round, perfectly round every time. Anyway, that's why they call it O-ring trivia. Let's talk about O-rings. So, and a lot of you guys out there I know, because I've been helping you, I've been giving you tips on how to service and take care of your own regulators. A lot of you guys out there I know are into cleaning at the very least, if not servicing, maybe even completely disassembling, rebuilding from scratch your own regulators, and you're going to run into O-rings. I mean, it's part of the job. You can buy service kits. If your local dive store owner is a reasonable person, good person, and he knows that you're capable, he may very well be a source for service kits for your equipment, specifically your regulator. If not, to be honest, you can get them on eBay. I've sold many regulator service kits, factory kits on eBay. And in that package, you'll find a bunch of O-rings. This is a service kit for a popular modern regulator, and there's a whole bunch. There's about 12 O-rings in there. In fact, that's about all is in there. There's an O-ring, there's a second stage seat, and a first stage seat, and everything else is O-rings in there. So there's lots of O-rings in there. But if you wanted to either couldn't get a service kit and wanted to get your own O-rings, because they're not uncommon. You can go into any fastener store, Fasco, or I just saw a new fastener store at Napa, a place like that. They have O-rings. You can take in your O-ring and say, I need one of these, and they'll sell you one. Now, an O-ring is worth about $1, small one. If you buy just one O-ring in a Napa, you pay $10 because they have a minimum purchase. So go in there when you need some other stuff too. A couple of X-Acto knives. Everybody needs a couple of box cutters. Anyway, so you can get your own O-rings. In fact, you can buy a kit. You can buy a box. You can go to a plumbing shop or Home Depot, and you can buy a box full of O-rings. And see, it looks like this. Lots of O-rings in there. And you can buy this. Now, these are, strictly speaking, these boxes are designed for plumbers or other people who use O-rings a great deal. And you can see there's all different sizes, from this little tiny one to big ones and different thicknesses and so on. But you'll also notice, and this was a box that I used for many years, you will also notice that in this box, some of these O-rings weren't used at all. Some of them are empty. Some have a couple left, but there's 2 or 3 of these that aren't used at all. A couple empty holes, there's an empty hole, and there's an empty hole there. Those particular empty holes were O-rings that fit scuba regulators, so I used them up. All the other ones are wasted. I can't use them. So buying a kit like that, universal kit, if you like, not necessarily very economical. You end up with a whole bunch of O-rings that you can't use, can't sell them. So that's not the smartest way to do it. But let's talk briefly about O-rings. Now, O-rings, when you do go into a store to buy O-rings, you're going to find that they're going to say to you, well, what size is the O-ring? And you're going to say, well, it's 4 inches across because you measured it. That's not what he wants. He doesn't want to hear that. Eventually, yeah, he needs to know. And ID is the distance from there to there. OD is the distance from there to there. ID, OD, inside diameter, outside diameter. Sure, he wants to know that eventually. But initially, he wants to know other things. He wants to know, first of all, the material. Is it neoprene? Is it Viton? Because there are different materials now that O-rings are made from, depending on the application. If you're going to be using the O-ring and you are using nitrox, oxygen enriched air, then you need to use Viton, or there's other types around it as well. Older regulators, or most regulators, just being used on normal compressed air, they still use neoprene, rubber, O-rings. So he needs to know the material. Then he wants to know the size. And again, you're going to say 4 inches. He said, no, I mean, what is the diameter, the thickness of the O-ring? Zoom in here, Kevin, and I'll show you what I mean. You see, they're all different thicknesses. If you're able to measure across the O-ring, the cross-section of each of these, you would see that each of these is a completely different thickness, different cross-section. And that has to be correct. If it isn't the right cross-section, it will not do the job. It will not fit, and it won't seal as it's supposed to. So you need to know the cross-section as well. And now, to complicate matters, not that it's bad, all of these measurements used to be in inches or fractions of an inch. Now they're also in metric. So you have inch O-rings and you have metric O-rings. So there's a lot more to O-rings than what you first imagine. And in terms of size, oh boy. Oh, I was also going to say now there's different materials too. Most O-rings now are synthetic. And you can usually tell if it's synthetic because it's not black. Not always. You can get black synthetic O-rings, just to make it confusing. But usually if they're colored. So this is a blue O-ring. It's definitely synthetic. This is a yellow O-ring. It's definitely synthetic. This O-ring is black and it's synthetic, but you can't tell because it looks the same as this O-ring, shinier. Maybe that's a clue, but if this was greasy, it'd be shiny. Anyway, so there's different materials that they're made from primarily as well. And then the sizes. After you get all that done, then there's the sizes. And the size could go from 4 inch to 1 inch. Okay, I'll get you to zoom in here again, Kevin, because I want to show the folks something. Compare the cross section of these two O-rings that almost every regulator has. So you see, there's a lot of variety, and the O-rings that you're going to need for your regulator are going to run the whole gamut. Now, regulators don't have 4-inch O-rings, but it's quite common in a piston regulator to have a 1.5 or 2-inch O-ring. 1.5 or 2 inch, all the way down to, I have no idea how big that is. No idea at all. And they're a nuisance. The small ones are very, very hard to work with. People say, oh, it's a small O-ring, it doesn't matter. They're the worst. It's so easy to injure them when you're trying to put them on with a pick and you injure, scratch the O-ring. It won't last very long. In fact, that particular tiny, tiny O-ring is from the swivel joint on your SPG, submersible pressure gauge, or computer. It's on that swivel joint, little tin swivel joint with 2 grooves, and there's 2 O-rings. In the service department, in our store anyway, it takes so long to replace those 2 O-rings on that swivel joint. The O-rings are $1.50 a piece, $3. That we just replaced the whole darn thing. We just put in a new air spool. It's called an air spool, a little metal rod with an O-ring. We just replaced the whole darn thing. It saves a lot of time. The whole thing costs $6. So for $3, you get a brand spanking new one, and it saves my service people a lot of time. So they range a lot. There's a lot to know about O-rings. You can actually measure. Now, how do you know And when it says, what's the cross-section diameter? How do you know? You could measure it, okay? There are actually tools available. There's a cone type of tool, and then there's another type of tool, which is like a sliding vernier gauge for measuring it. And you can buy those. They're not inexpensive. That's the problem. You're going to pay $100 or more for that. If you don't do a lot of it, it's not worth it. But you can also quite easily get these size charts. See them? Size charts. And you can set the O-ring on the O-ring, on the size chart. And you can see not only the inside-outside diameter, but you can also see the thickness, if you like. So you can see on here that these O-rings are much thicker than these O-rings, and those O-rings are much thicker than these O-rings. So you can get all of those measurements by using one of these charts. And these charts are available, you can copy them right off the internet. You need to be a little bit careful. When you go to the internet and you look for O-ring size chart, okay, this one is from Captain O-ring, okay, CaptainO-ring.com. If you go and you find this on the internet now, so this is great. It's just like Alec Peirce's, yeah, and you can copy it and print it. There's the problem. When you copy it and print it, it may not be exactly right. So that is 1.5 inch O-ring. You copy and print it, now that diameter isn't necessarily 1.5 inches. So you'd be very, very careful. And the only way to know for sure is to get an O-ring, put it on here, and be sure that your chart is still accurate. Anyway, you don't understand what I'm talking about. Anyway, there you go. Bit of information about O-rings, how important they are, different materials, different sizes, and all kinds of neat stuff, big ones and small ones, and where to get them, and so on. Hope there was something in there of value to you guys that are doing your own service, or maybe just like some general information about scuba diving. Alec Peirce, Scuba Tech Tips. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.